So first of all, let us introduce me and my staff. My name is Omar Conforti. I'm an Israeli a lawyer. My experience is commercial and M&As, basically mainly with startups of all stages from cradle to grave. My co-founders, two co-founders in Accelera Venturing, which I'll present briefly in a minute, are Yegnesh Zundar, also attending this webinar. Indian national, grew up in Botswana, an engineer with experience in entrepreneurship, founded a company in Botswana, a communication company. And Luca Mastrilli, he's an Italian national, a management consultant. We all met on the International MBA of IE Business School. Part of our international experience and experience with diversity derives from IE Business School. The International MBA program contains or is attended by more than 90% international students. The student body is made of 90% international students, non-Spaniards. After graduating, 6 months more or less after graduating, we decided to found Accelera Venturing, our startup, which is the purpose of the startup. The startup targets startups in all stages, and we want to help them grow and accelerate their business, among others, via diversity and using diversity. So this is where we met, all three of us, an Indian, an Israeli, and an Italian. And actually the boxed part is where we start our journey, our diverse journey. And the topics we're going to discuss today, by the way, I would like to just say, to begin with, that if you have any question, please write them down or feel free to use the messaging board, the Q&A board. Yegi will write down all the questions, and then both of us will answer at the end of the session some of the questions. If you have an urgent question, something you didn't understand, like a phrase or anything, please feel free to write or even highlight it as urgent, so we know to stop and explain in the meanwhile. So what we're going to talk about today are first reasons for thinking global, even in times of COVID-19 and international lockdown. Then the obstacles for international expansion. We're going to talk about general obstacles that existed even before COVID-19, and we're going to talk about the ones that are even enhanced during times of COVID-19. And then we're going to talk about diversity, the way through, but how diversity allows us to keep international mindset and successful expansion plans in order while in times of international, let's call it international struggle or struggle to cooperate. So we'll start with, okay. The reason for thinking global. So first of all, we have the potential clients. So why we need to think global is because that's obvious. None of the the technological giants we know, we're familiar with today, would not have existed if not for international markets. If we think about Facebook, if we think about WhatsApp, if we think about Zoom, LinkedIn, Microsoft, their customer base is diverse, international, and they wouldn't be the giant they are today if they wouldn't expand into foreign markets. That's first. Second is, in addition actually to those technological giants, one must acknowledge that even in the more traditional industries, such as automotive, such as food and beverage, keeping an international mindset helps you grow your business. More client base, a bigger client base is more profitable, as we all know. So that's first. Second is potential partnerships. In partnerships, I mean strategical partnerships, such as sales channels, for example, and moreover, also suppliers, different suppliers that help us, on one hand, reduce our costs, our manufacturing costs, for example, and helps us maintain a more global mindset and international mindset. The third one, and we think it's very important nowadays, is actually international cooperation. Well, international cooperation will be how the international community is able to, first of all, live with the situation of COVID-19 and maybe even overcome it. We believe in Accelera that international cooperation is extremely relevant and extremely important for our ability, for humanity's ability to handle COVID-19. Innovative solutions from one end of the globe will probably help us manage the situation in other parts of the globe. And all in all, it provides one main reason, which is an overall growth opportunity for the company, even in times of COVID-19. So that's why we need to keep thinking global. What are the obstacles? So the obstacles are mainly unfamiliarity with the target market, and that comes in two aspects. First of all is the structural nature of the market, economic nature, and the other is behavioral nature of the market, meaning more cultural aspects, which we'll talk about soon. Another part is that this process is non-intuitive. It's a non-intuitive process. Expanding to other markets cannot be done unless you know what you're doing, unless you plan in advance, you structure in a creative go-to-market strategy, go-to-market plan, and you use knowledge, skills, and local network in order to do it. And the last one is the lack of local contacts and boots on the ground, which nowadays, again, in COVID-19 times, is made even harder with us not being able, or you as entrepreneurs and business people, not being able to physically be present in the market you want to go to, you want to expand to. All these obstacles make international expansion very hard, especially in times of COVID-19, but as we will show and will claim during this talk, we believe it's even more important for startups and businesses to think global in order for us to maintain our opportunities and overcome COVID-19. So when we talk about the way through, we talk about diversity. We believe diversity is the way through. And when we talk about diversity, we divide it into two parts. The darker blue parts, the purple parts, are external diversity aspects. So it's external aspects of diversity which can be divided into structural and cultural, as we discussed before. The lighter part is an internal diversity component, which is team diversity. We're going to discuss all of this really soon, but just keep in mind that we're talking about external diversity and internal diversity as ways to go through the obstacles. So when we talk about structural aspects of diversity, or the structural aspects of different markets, we talk about six components, six aspects. First is the general market structure, how the market was built. So different markets, different economies have different ways in how they operate. So for example, if we take the healthcare system, ecosystem, if you're an Israeli entrepreneur operating in the healthcare ecosystem and you want to expand into the US or into Europe, you choose two different strategies altogether, because the US healthcare ecosystem is mostly private. Healthcare providers are mostly private, and unless you have private insurance, you won't be eligible, mostly won't be eligible for getting treatment in the US, while in Europe, it's a government subsidized commodity. It's a birthright for Europeans. So if you're in Europe and you want to go, and if you're a startup, Israeli startup, want to go to Europe, then you probably talk to governments, to governmental entities, while in the US, you'll talk to private sector and to private clients. Market maturity, well, that's actually the readiness level of the market to use your product. So for example, if you want to go, if you have a data heavy startup and you want to launch it in international markets, probably you wouldn't do it in, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, where Wi-Fi and internet coverage is pretty weak, it's pretty low. You would rather do it in other markets where heavy data-based information or softwares can actually work better. So that's market maturity. And last here in this slide, we talk about competition and market dominance. And actually, if you're, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this company, with WeChat, Tencent's subsidiary, WeChat, which is a Chinese super app. Basically, just in a few words, it's a Chinese super app that covers and controls pretty much the entire mobile activity of Chinese people. So it pretty much controls the Chinese market. If you're, for example, a instant messaging app or let's say a fintech company that would like to expand into China, that wouldn't be easy, to say the least, because the market is controlled by this company, which provides instant messaging, social media, connection to healthcare providers, and among others, banking services. So, or online banking services, to be more precise. So competition and market dominance are factors you need to take into consideration while aiming a new market. The three other aspects, first of all, is the demographics of the target market. So different people, different, let's say, demographical backgrounds have different preferences. The most well-known example is actually Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola is an interesting story, which I guess you've experienced. If you drink Coca-Cola in Europe and if you drink Coca-Cola in Israel or in Africa, the taste wouldn't be similar, wouldn't be the same, because Coca-Cola identified that Europeans like their beverages less sugary than, for example, Semitic people or African natives. So they changed the entire product, the entire solution of the product as to fit the specific market they target. You as a startup, if you're all working as a startup, it would be much harder for you to tailor your product to fit different market, especially if your product is heavy, is technologically heavy. So that's first. Second is purchasing power. And that's the amount of money your target market has in his pockets, and the let's say the way they can spend this money on your product. So a good example is Starbucks. When Starbucks are having difficult times penetrating the Indian market, because for you and I, for Western economies, Starbucks, you know, the latte macchiato or cappuccino of Starbucks costs between 2 to 5 euros, or $2 to $5. $2 to $5 for us is a normal price to pay for a cup of coffee. But in India, that could be like the price of a very good meal. So it depends on how much, how free you are, how much leeway you have to change your product pricing and keep profitability. Not in all markets that will be possible. The last one is the political situation in the country, which affects your ability to enter the country and affects other strategic aspects of your product, of your company. So for example, I can give our example, that me as an Israeli entrepreneur, the easiest thing for me would have been to establish the company in Israel. But since we are targeting also the Middle Eastern markets and Middle Eastern companies, startups, we decided that it would be best to establish the company in Ireland to avoid all kinds of political complexities they might have with operating with an Israeli company. Another good example is Uber. Uber's attempt to enter the Israeli market was intensified, the difficulty was intensified by the fact that in Israel, taxi services are provided, first of all, by licensed, completely by licensed taxi drivers. But the reason for that is partly political, is partly for security reasons, which was a factor that Uber could not, and are still trying actually to overcome. So political aspect, the political situation, and we can include the legal and regulatory ecosystem or scenery that we're operating in are extremely important when you decide which country you want to enter. So that was the structural part. We're going to talk now about the cultural part, the cultural aspects, which are, sorry about that, which can be divided into three parts. So first of all is local cultural nuances. And for us as Israelis, that's pretty straightforward. We all know that Israelis are pretty direct in the way they do business, in the way we do business, and some nations or some other people from other countries will say that we are even blunt in our business conduct, in our level of directness. Similarly, but I believe, and from my experience, to a lower degree, a bit lower degree, we can put the Netherlands, Dutch people, and German people. The middle, in between the two range, the range of the sphere we see the UK and India. So UK, India, and actually it pretty much covers all the former UK countries. You wouldn't get, they're not direct per se, but you get a pretty cold reaction if you come up with, for example, a suggestion they don't like, or if you're too direct, if you're being blunt and they wouldn't like it. So that's something we need to take into consideration when we are when we explore our market opportunities. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the Japanese. If you got a chance to talk to Japanese, to make business with Japanese, you probably notice that unless you ask them a direct question, they wouldn't state their opinion directly, which could be pretty problematic if you're trying to do business with them, because you wouldn't know what they're actually thinking, and you wouldn't be able first to negotiate or structure your proposition for their benefit. And most probably you wouldn't get any feedback, and that could be pretty exhausting and pretty hard to overcome. In between, we have the US, which is kind of between the German-Israeli and the UK-Indian nuances. So you would know if Americans don't like your proposition, the way you do things. They will pretty much state it and you will know it, but they wouldn't be as direct as we are. And the French, which are closer to the Japanese, again, they wouldn't say no, they wouldn't disagree with you bluntly and out in the open. But you must keep in mind these nuances, and you must know these nuances, because inability to execute or to work in this environment might burn your bridges before even you get to the material part of your meeting or of your interaction. Another aspect is business culture. Well, when we go to foreign markets, I know that I like to go and visit local markets, because that way I can actually experience the local culture without any filters, hopefully. So in business conduct, it's similar. Different people have different business culture, different way they do business, and different way their business mindset is built. So I'll share a personal experience from the MBA. I had a Russian and a Mexican in my group. The Mexican actually was brought up in the US, so we had two different cultural business cultures. We had, on one hand, we had the Russian guy that was very direct and was, as many Russians are, very strict, and he grew up in a country where the government's role was heavier in the business conduct and business activity. While on the other hand, we had a Mexican guy who brought up in the US. He was more like a free role player. He wasn't as strict, and he was more into free market and liberal market. And when we came across a discussion about the government's role for a project we did, which was pretty crucial, they got in a huge disagreement, a huge fight. And actually, if it wasn't for us trying to bridge the gap, they wouldn't be able to overcome this bridge. They wouldn't be able to understand the other's perspective, the other's culture, the culture from which the other side comes from. Another good example I can provide, I can give you in this aspect is actually from my experience, being an Israeli M&A lawyer. One of my clients tried to do business and sealed actually a deal in Italy. Well, Italy is a Western market. We're pretty much familiar with it. We think we're very much similar to the Italian people. Well, my client went to a meeting in Italy. Coming back to Israel, he thought, well, everything is sealed, everything is closed, it's a closed deal. Just to come back and receive an email from the Italian counterpart saying, opening some aspect of the negotiations and renegotiating some aspects of the deal. Well, obviously, my client saw it as an outrage. He was outraged by it. But actually, that's business conduct in Italy, especially in the family businesses ecosystem. So that's how they do business. By the way, the former, the Italian example I gave you, there's a pretty famous business case taught throughout business schools about an American private equity company trying to acquire a car manufacturer. I think it was either Ferrari or Ducati. I don't remember. But you can look it out on Google. It's pretty good, and it covers what I discussed right now. The other one is behavioral traits, and that's actually very interesting. That's an interesting example. So we have the Europeans, and actually Europe is just one example, because the US and I think the entire Western civilization is pretty much similar in that extent. We have Western markets and we have China. Well, our entire mobile activity is governed by a spread of many companies. So we have Facebook, we have Zoom, we have Google, we have Revolut, we have all kinds of companies controlling our mobile and online conduct. So we use Zoom for online meetings, we use Google for search and email, we use Revolut for banking, online banking and fintech, and we use Facebook as a social media platform. Well, in China, that's not the same. China uses WeChat. And one of the reasons, I think, for this difference is because, well, we as Western people, as people grew up in Western culture, we are petrified by the idea, by the notion of one company controlling all our data, all information around us, about us. While WeChat, Chinese people, are actually accustomed to a centralized government controlling pretty much all aspects of their lives. During COVID-19, we could have seen that, how effectively and strongly the Chinese government was able to execute and initiate lockdown. Some of the reason was because it's centralized. It's a centralized mechanism, while in other Western parts of the world, we're now just starting to discover and realize the harshness and the consequences of our inability to be strict. It has its good sides, has its benefits and its disadvantages, but I think that's a pretty important thing you need to take into consideration while trying to enter a new market. What are the traits, the behavioral traits of the local clients, the local customers? So the next thing we're going to talk about is team diversity. So we're moving on to the internal part, the internal aspect of diversity as a way through the obstacles that you face during international expansion. And actually that comes to play when trying to come up with the market expansion plan, which is important. It's crucial for your expansion strategy or expansion efforts. As we said, market expansion or international market expansion is not intuitive. It's not an intuitive process. I actually advise several companies trying to expand into foreign markets, and they were unable to do so because they didn't realize that this process requires a lot of thought, but also internal diversity and creativity. Well, internal diversity is diversity in terms of age, in terms of racial background, religion, and sex and sexual orientation. All of these help you. There are studies that show that that internal diversity help the organization be more creative and be more agile. You're used to being more agile and you're used to being more creative in your day-to-day conduct. And it helps you initiate a creative market expansion plan. Market expansion plan is not something you can just download from Google or download from I don't know where. It's something you need to pay attention, you need to pay your thought and your attention to, because eventually it's not a one solution fits all. There's no one size fits all plan. Depends on your company, on your organization, and on your target market, as we said before, the behavioral and structural traits of your target market. So if we pretty much sum up until now, the three aspects we discussed are structural aspect, the cultural aspect, and the internal diversity as external and internal components of diversity. The fourth part that actually we discussed on our obstacles is boots on the ground. So the lack of local contacts and the lack of familiarity with the market is one crucial barrier for us as entrepreneurs, for you as entrepreneurs, or for other business companies or companies trying to expand to other markets in successfully initiating their plans. And this is for two reasons. First of all, the reason we discussed. If you don't know the market, if you're unaware, inexperienced in working with the market, probably you'll have a hard time entering the market. The other reason is that you don't have local connections. And by local connections, I mean these deep connections that only a local person can make. Some companies try to bridge the gap of physical connection by hiring go-to guys that will help them in their penetration or entrance efforts. Well, this was and is still a common practice. We believe it's not, it is limited in its ability to help your company succeed in this private market for several reasons. One of which is that if you don't have internal or actually, if you don't have the, let's say, if your go-to guy is not completely accountable to your company, well, it might or might not create a lead, create a bridge, but if it's not someone you trust, it's not someone you actually know, well, if it's not a partner, well, it's problematic. So boots on the ground is knowledge and network, and physical network. And what we try to do in Accelera, actually, that's why we initiated Accelera. Accelera is the world's first consolidators network. We help startups in different stages to build and grow their businesses, be it build the foundations of the businesses or build an international expansion plan. We do it by leveraging the resources of an international network of business people to the benefit of startups, of our clients, our customers. So what we did in order to do the diversity, in order to be as diverse as possible, we recruited 45 consolidators. That's the members of our network from different parts of the world. As you can see here, our coverage is pretty wide. We have consolidators all over the world. And what we do is basically we use their knowledge, their expertise and skill, business expertise and skills, and their network in order to tailor each startup that joins the platform a unique and customized expansion plan. So we do it by attaching or matching each startup with 2 international consolidators that will use all their resources in order to build this unique growth program. And then we work with the startup for 3 months in order to help it successfully engage the challenges it faces or achieve the goals, if you want. So we're currently undergoing our pilot. We have still some spots available in the pilot. You're more than welcome to contact us later and we can tell you more about it. But basically this program allows us to cover what we discussed, all of the structural, cultural aspects, the internal diversity and boots on the ground. These are all covered by our program. This is what we are doing in Accelera. So we discussed international expansion. We discussed what comes in your way and what stands in your way actually and denies you international expansion. We discussed ways to overcome this, and we explained how we are able to help you doing these exact things. You can contact us, you can now ask questions and contact us, visit our website or through our LinkedIn and Facebook social media. So cheers guys, hope you had a beneficial, we were able to help you and be beneficial for your health, for your cause. I wish you all great success and good luck and hope to hear from you guys soon.